to now welcome Frida Berrigan from the Arms Trade Resource Center, who will be our last speaker, and then we have time for some discussion.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real privilege to be on this panel. I was just looking at the New York Times today. We know the Times has at least one article devoted to covering the news in Iraq each day. And today's article, the headline was, Baghdad car bomb kills 20 on Booksellers Row. And it's sort of focused on this terrible tragedy there in Baghdad. But in that article, and this is sort of common practice in the New York Times in coverage of the war in Iraq, the last third or the last quarter of every article is sort of a laundry list of all the other bad things that happened in Iraq that day. So today we had 6 people were killed and dozens were wounded in other bombings and shootings around the country. A policeman was killed, 4 bodies were found, an American soldier was killed, another was wounded. British soldiers found 30 prisoners, including 1 woman and 2 children. They later escaped. This is all in the same article. Those American and Iraqi forces continued to search houses in Sadr City. So there's about 20 different stories in that one news article. There's no context, there's no meaning. There's really this invitation to the reader to turn a deaf ear, to tune it out. As I was reading the paper this morning, I was thinking about how this willingness on the part of the American people to turn a deaf ear to what's happening in Iraq, it can kind of be understood in direct inverse relationship to the amount of money that Americans are paid for the war in Iraq. That there's this sort of seesaw of all the money and how little interest and attention is paid. According to a Washington economist named Scott Woolston, the United States is spending about $300 million a day. $300 million a day to perpetrate the war and the occupation of Iraq. The Pentagon sort of supports this number with its own figure of $8.4 billion a month. $8.4 billion a month that's going into war and occupation in Iraq. And that's direct costs, right? That's not the costs that we will incur as a society when the veterans return and they need care for the rest of their lives. All the other sort of attendant costs that go into the So since 2001, just to sort of throw more numbers at you, this will be my role here, is to just dump a whole bunch of numbers at you. Since 2001, in the beginning of what we now understand as the global war on terrorism, the United States has spent $500 billion, and again in direct allocation of money, $500 billion in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere. So $300 million a day, $8.4 billion a month, about $500 billion spent since September 11, 2001. And we need to understand these numbers, as much as we can understand these numbers, on top of the Pentagon budget, on top of a military budget that has risen since President Bush came into office from about $300 billion a year to about $500 billion a year. So all these other figures are on top of sort of our baseline military spending. Yafat referred to the Salvador option in Iraq, and I want to spend a little bit more time talking about that, where Rumsfeld and others have rewritten history, completely rewritten history, in order to argue that offering material support, offering weapons and training to death squads is somehow, and using them as proxies, proxy tools in the establishment and maintenance of control in Iraq, that's a viable, sort of suitable, useful set of policy tools. There's a lot to say about the parallels between U.S. policy in Iraq, U.S. policy in El Salvador in the 70s and 80s. It's particularly interesting, its use of the concept Salvador option in light of a few things. One, that now that the United Kingdom is withdrawing its troops from Iraq, El Salvador, this tiny little country, is one of the major members of the coalition of the willing in Iraq. They have about 300, maybe as many as 400 soldiers on the ground in Iraq. With the withdrawal of the UK and South Korea thinking about withdrawing its troops as well, they will be a major partner, which is interesting. Another reason that this is particularly interesting is that many U.S. soldiers are Salvadoran in origin and lured into military service by the promise of citizenship. In two cases, that citizenship has been granted posthumously to those soldiers and their families. Right, the soldier has been killed, and that citizenship is awarded to his family after he dies. So the Salvadorization of Iraq is a dirty and it's a discounted policy, but it's being heralded, it's being sort of walked around, and has been for a while as a viable option.